Welcome to Candid Caller, where we take anonymous calls to unveil untold stories. We feel as though lots of people have had some sort of experience with crime, and a lot of these stories are untold. And so therefore, we feel compelled and excited about uncovering all these stories and giving the opportunity to people to share their experiences candidly and without fear of judgment. I'm Lily Mackey, and I am joined by my co-host and younger sister, Rosa Mackey. And we're definitely coming from two different angles for this podcast.
Why are we coming from two different angles?
Well, I'm a criminologist. I went to uni, so I got a degree in criminology and have a background in kind of law and started a master's in counterterrorism and national security. So I have a bit of a interesting perception and interesting kind of background in all of this.
You have more knowledge than
more
me.
knowledge in terms of crime, but I think your experience and your firsthand kind of personal experience and the way that you kind of connect with other people and put yourself out there more probably gives you also an interesting perspective. Right. So it's kind of like academic versus kind of more open and yeah, I would say that that's kind of the different perspective. This week's episode is a really exciting one, and we are especially excited for it because it is coming from the perception of someone who decided to take the law into their own hands in a very unconventional way. And instead of reporting his incident to the police, he felt it better to
take it on first hand.
And
I guess it's kind of different for men and women. They can deal with crime differently based on gender.
It sparked a lot of conversation between us about how men and women respond to crime and how women might respond to crime differently to men because of certain stereotypes, biases that happen in society. I think a lot of times men would feel slightly more compelled to respond to crime.
Yeah, empowered.
Yeah, potentially empowered to respond to crime in that sort of way, whereas women might feel as though they would go more of a legal route and go through government agencies. Having said that, though, it's interesting because the rates of unreported crime are so high in the UK. Yeah. And we know that the most unreported crime is sexual violence and rape. It's interesting when we talked about doing this podcast and I had the idea to do Candid Caller, it came from a place of really wanting to have more insight into how people respond to crime, feel about crime, experience crime from more of a point of view of how can I tackle this with my startup? You know, how can I sort of like make an impact? Whereas I think from your point of view, it was more trying to connect with people on that sort of level. You know, I feel like that was kind of the difference between us.
Yeah, I think we're lucky to be able to have a platform to speak to people. And hopefully I feel like people may feel a bit more open to speak to me based on the fact that...
Why would they feel more open to speak
because I just feel like I don't have the knowledge that you have. And
so
I guess there's just a mutual understanding with me and people that don't really get this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
I think the majority of people don't get this sort of stuff. I think people hear about crime, but they don't actually know about crime. It's different.
Yeah. And I feel like the way that people respond to crime, and to tie into today's episode, coming from the perspective of a man who has responded to crime in an unconventional way, the interesting thing is the way that I've studied crime and all of that sort of stuff, it's not really spoken about. You know, we only really know about cases where people have gone to the police and then, you know, shared that with a government agency, and therefore we can then study it. Whereas all these people who have taken crime into their own hands, and there's a whole range of reasons why people might do that. And I'm so excited and interested to hear why he's decided to do that. But it's interesting for me and for you for different reasons to learn more about that, because those are the cases that slip through the cracks. And that's why we've decided to do Candid Caller, because these cases matter. And although they're not statistically, you know, considered, they are as important, if not more important, in a lot of ways, because there's probably a lot of these types of cases that we don't hear about.
And say I was to be a person that's now decided to take crime into my own hands, would I then be able to legally still come for the people that have...
Well, it's like obviously a case by case basis. If a crime has occurred and you were the victim of a crime, and instead of going to the police and reported it, you've decided to, you know, try and find those people and, you know, deal with it on your own. And by doing that, you have committed a crime. I don't know what this case is about, so I'm not sure, but then you would then technically be in a bad situation legally because you have committed a crime.
Would they be different
as well?
Would they like be reported to be two separate things though?
Yes. Yeah.
So you would report the crime that's actually happened, and then the crime that you...
Yeah, but then so the guy who's committed the first crime is going to say to the police, oh, hey, I committed a crime, and then he's committed a crime against me. So. It's quite unreal. It's a pretty unrealistic situation. Yeah. But yeah, obviously we wouldn't encourage anyone to commit crime.
The crime that you've committed because you are the victim originally, if that crime is less severe, then...
Well, yeah, obviously it's like there's levels, there's misdemeanors, there's all sorts of different types of crimes. So, but we wouldn't encourage anyone to commit any type of crime. And obviously going to the police would be, you know, the best kind of course of action. Arguably, you know, some people would say that's not true, but, you know, we should really encourage that. But like that kind of goes into the whole conversation of why do people not report crime? Why do women and men feel as though they can't go to the police? And I feel like we could sit here
feel as
all
though
day.
They can go to the police, but ultimately what's actually going to be done about it to
well, it's
make
like
it better?
Two separate things. Reporting the crime is the first thing, and then the police's response to the report is a second thing. And then the kind of consequences and the way that the law is implemented is a third. And so it's like a step-by-step thing, but obviously the first step is always to report the crime. I think it's interesting to look at it. I mean, we could sit here all day and talk about why people don't want to report crimes and why people don't feel comfortable reporting crimes for, you know, there's a whole range of reasons. What do you think is like the main reasons that women specifically don't want to report crime? I mean, I feel like we could...
Probably victim blaming.
Victim blaming is like a huge thing. I feel like that's, you know, such a sad reality of the society we live in today, that a lot of times people think, people respond in that way and ask really horrendous questions and sort of like you say, victim blame, which is obviously a awful outcome in some situations.
I think that a lot of people, well, my reason, if something had happened to me and then I thought, okay, cool, I should probably report this, the thing that would keep me from reporting it would be, one, the fact that it takes so long. It's such a long process to enroll all your information, explain what's happened, all of that. And then probably two, after I've done all that, actually how long it's going to take to even get some form of justice. And then actually, will I be on top of it? Maybe questioned in a way that I may also be in the wrong.
Or you feel like
I feel like maybe I was
in the wrong.
Maybe I was in the wrong. Or exactly.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel as though, I mean, I can even speak from my personal experience that things have happened to me in the past where I haven't reported it. And I was actually telling this story really recently. So
you love a call to the police?
No, I have called the police, but actually twice, but not it. Well, once I called actually the fire department because there was a horrible fire. This car was ablaze on a main road, and there was this. It actually sounds like it was out of a movie, but this car literally was ablaze, fully engulfed, and there was a family that was getting out this car. It was so scary. So anyway, I called the fire department for that, and then I also called the police once because there was this guy who jumped in front of my car randomly.
What? You never told me this.
Yeah, he jumped in front of my car
when you were driving.
Yeah, sort of distressed because he was jumping in front of people's cars. He was walking on the main road, kind of jumping in front of you. So obviously I had to call the police for that, for them to,
escort him away.
Yeah, and offer him support and services. Hopefully that's what he got. But I think, so the story I was going to come back to. So I was once followed and by a group of men in a car, and it was such a scary experience, and I never reported it. And I regret not having reported it because I feel as though it would have made me feel better if I had reported it. I had noted down the number plate.
Why do you think it would have made you feel better?
Because I think that there's definitely something in it of feeling as though like, oh my gosh, how have these people gotten away with it? And then have all this sort of like pent up anxiety and I feel nervous now. So what happened was I was driving my dog to the vet and the vet was like outside of London. So in order to get to this vet, I had to go through sort of like countryside roads and all of that sort of stuff. So I got to a huge roundabout and a car to my right let me go in front of him. So obviously I really didn't think anything of it, kind of carried on. A few miles down the road, I realized this car was still behind me. But again, you know, I didn't massively think much of it. Although I am the type of person that like notices stuff like that. I'm always looking behind me, figuring out kind of what's going on around in my surroundings. So I obviously noticed
I think naturally living in London too, you do.
Yeah.
More so than other places.
For sure. So I had noticed it, kind of made a mental note, kind of carried on. And then anywho, I got to a section of road it was just me on the road with this other car. And so obviously, you know, I was looking in my mirror, kind of figuring out.
Like number one thing you shouldn't do.
Of what?
When you're being followed in your car to go to.
Well, I didn't really think much of it because I was going to this hospital for my dog, this like specialized vet center or whatever. So I didn't think much of it, although it was something I had considered, but you know, I just didn't really think much. Like I thought about it, but I didn't think about it.
It's different when you're in it to when you reflect about it after.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly the car started speeding up and like it would speed up till it was so close to the back of my car and then they would like brake and then they would like go back and then they'd speed up and I could see them speeding up and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to crash. And then they would like overtake me. And then whilst they were like we were side by side, they were like, you know, making really sort of like horrible remarks, aggressive comments, you know, really taunting and...
Wait, how are they making aggressive comments in the car?
Like they were literally, all the windows were down. There were 4 of them in the car. They're like probably middle-aged or so. And they were like shouting out the car, hanging their heads out the window, like physically making horrible gestures, like awful. And then they would go back behind me. And this probably went on for, I don't know, it felt like an eternity, but probably wasn't that long. I don't know, maybe 5-6 minutes. And then obviously at this stage I was really like, I felt really anxious and worried. And I felt as though the reason why they were doing it, among other reasons, was that they were like trying to get me to crash or trying to get me so that then I would then have to get out my car, which obviously I wouldn't do. But, you know, typically that's what you would do in that situation. So anywho, I called Jack, my partner, and obviously there was nothing he could do. Like I was like so nervous. I was like freaking out or whatever. And I had noted down their number plate with the like thought that I was going to report them.
Right.
And then anywho, thankfully I got to like a big roundabout and I like totally slowed down. At this point there was lots of cars and I like went totally off. Like I was going in the wrong direction. Of where I was supposed to be going for the destination, but whatever, I just wanted to get back on the motorway, and then I managed to floor it and get away. But it was really scary. And I think in that type of situation, I was thinking like, oh my gosh, your mind starts running like, what is going to happen? What if I crash? What if I veer off the road? Like, you know, there are all these questions that you have. So anywho, I got home, shaken, you know, I was totally kind of like shaken by this experience and I didn't report it. And I don't know why. I just felt as though, you know, how can I prove it? I don't have a dash cam. You know, what if, I don't know, like how do I report that? How do I prove who was in the car? Because I don't remember their faces. Like, although I saw there were 4 of them in the car, how am I supposed to prove exactly who was in the car? Mm-hmm. How am I supposed to say?
I think describing one person is one thing. Describing 4 different people is another thing.
Yeah. But the frightening reality of that situation is I was thinking, and I remember thinking in the car, like, oh my gosh, I bet that like one at least of these men is a father, is a friend, is a cousin, is a neighbor. You know, these are not random people who jump out of bushes. These are people who live in communities and live among us and yet behave this way. And again, it comes back to the not reporting it and then feeling like, oh my God, they've got away with it because it's just so wrong. And I can't imagine that I was the first person that they did that. That they did that to. So a very frightening ordeal Indeed.
Very frightening.
So on that note of not reporting crime for lots of different reasons, today's caller, as we kind of hinted at, is someone who has taken an unconventional approach to crime. He had an incident happen to him, and instead of going to the police and reporting it to a government agency, he decided to take the law into his own hands. And we are very excited to learn more about this and understand why he decided to do that and what the impact of that has been on him and his life. Okay, so this week's caller has taken a slightly unconventional approach to crime, and we're really excited to hear more about his story. Would you like to tell us your story, please?
This was sort of my reaction and my response to a robbery in which I was the victim. I'm a personal trainer, and I was at the time working with a client. I own a personal training gym in a 5-star hotel. That's where we were. Half an hour into my session, a notification popped up on my mobile phone to say that someone used my Amex in a Waitrose, which there is one sort of right across the road from where I was. My first reaction was, it must be my wife, because I haven't been in Waitrose. So I was like, you know what, let me give her a quick call and then find out. So I said to my client, look, let me just quickly make a quick call and find out who that was. Gave my wife a call. Did you use my Amex? No, it wasn't me. Okay, alarm bell started to ring. I thought maybe it's a delayed reaction on my phone to a transaction I made earlier, but then I realized I hadn't been in there for a while. My Amex was in my rucksack, which was sort of in the room next door. So I went and had a look to see if my rucksack was still there, and my rucksack wasn't there. So the first thing I did is I realized obviously my rucksack had been taken. I went in and spoke to my client and I said, look, I need to interrupt our session for a few minutes because I feel like someone's taken my rucksack. It was just used in Waitrose. Do you mind if I sort of run across the road and have a look and see if I can spot anyone behaving suspiciously? So I got up, ran across the road, had a look around. Obviously, I mean, it was kind of finding a needle in a haystack. There was no one around that was behaving weirdly. So I went and asked the staff and I said, look, this transaction just popped up on my phone. Someone's used my Amex in the last like 5 to 10 minutes. Is there any way you guys can track it for me?
Right.
And they said, yeah, we kind of have to look at the CCTV and we have to pull up a transaction report. At this point, I was losing time and I'm like, this guy's going to be getting away at this point, and I don't have time to sort of wait for these procedures to happen.
Yeah.
So at that point, I had a choice. I was like, look, I can either call Amex and call my other bank and cancel all my cards, which is going to be a hassle, or I can sort of wait around and see if that person happens to use my card again. And within like 6 or 7 minutes, another notification came up. It was Boots, which was right opposite Waitrose. And then within like a minute of that, another transaction popped up at a pub, which was very, very close by. I got there within 30 seconds. And as soon as I walked in, it was the guy who like looked at me as if he's seen a ghost.
Oh my gosh.
Sort of walked out of the pub. He's walked out, but he hasn't got my rucksack on him, but it's definitely him. I just had that feeling. I looked around the pub and my rucksack was there on the chair where he sort of had left. And I was like, okay, had a bit of relief, but then I was like, let me unzip everything. Let me make sure everything's there. So I went in there, opened up my rucksack. Thankfully, my laptop, which was in there, was there, my iPad. But then I opened my front zip and my wallet wasn't in there. Left the pub and tried to follow the guy. The guy had basically he went into like a brisk jog straight away.
I bet.
Knew that I was probably going to follow him. Legged it, basically.
Absolutely legged it.
Probably saw me coming for him, started accelerating. At this point, he started to go into Tesco. So I kind of pulled the guy back from his shoulder. He behaved all dramatically and fell onto the floor and acted like I was attacking him. And I was like, look, I'm not going to do anything to you, but just but just give me my wallet. And he acted dumb and pretended like he didn't have it, and was like, what wallet? And I was like, look, I know you have my wallet. This will be easy if you give it to me, and then we can both get on with our day. He kind of threw the wallet at me, and then again got up and started running out of Tesco.
Okay.
So I've got all my goods. I'm pleased, but then I'm still in rage mode, and I'm like, this guy needs to be brought to justice.
Okay.
So I was like, you know what? I've got a bit of energy. My client's left already. I don't need to be anywhere. Let me sort of run after the guy, and at the same time, I'll call the police at this point. And if they can catch him while I'm running after him, then that would be perfect.
Right.
So
your initial thought really was to have a sort of joint kind of venture with the police in a way, to actually have the police also be involved as well as you having sort of solved it to an extent. The police kind of came in more as a justice as opposed to solving the case.
I knew had I called the police at the beginning when everything kicked off, everything would have taken too long. So I was like, let me try and get this bit done. And if I can get hold of the guy, then I'll try and make it easier for them to catch him. And even at this point, I'm right behind him. And I'm like, look, I've got two choices. I can either sort of grab him, but then who knows what's going to happen next.
Right.
Or I can just keep chasing him until he gets tired, and then hopefully the police will catch up with us. So I'm on the phone to the police at this point. I'm kind of giving them an indication of where we're running and where we're heading to. After 3 or 4 minutes of running, this guy decides to run into the tube station. And at that point, I'm like, I can either go through the barriers and literally get on the train with him, or I'm not going to let him inconvenience my day any further.
Right.
So he made the right decision as a thief by getting into the station and sort of losing me. And unfortunately, by that point, the police hadn't turned up. But obviously, thankfully, I got my stuff back.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, then when I opened my rucksack, everything that he had bought was in my rucksack. So
that's so good.
And I often try to put myself in the mind of this thief, what the guy was thinking, because in my rucksack was like 10 bags of tobacco, a bag of peanuts, and a perfume from Boots.
What?
It was a dumb theft from him. I like to think that I was quite sharp in my thinking and not cancelling my card and doing it. I'm not sure if I would recommend that most people go down that route.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you were to do it again, if this was to happen again, would you respond in the same way that you did? I guess you did get your belongings back, which is a positive, but you didn't really get justice in that. I suppose there's justice in the fact that everything that he'd bought was in the bag. Not that you'd have much interest in tobacco, peanuts, and perfume, but although there's some justice in that, but actually him being a thief and being able to carry this out time and time again hasn't really been halted by you reporting it. So would you, if it was to happen again, how would you respond to the situation?
Look, the reason why I responded in the way that I did is, as I mentioned briefly, in the same area, I had 2 occasions where my car had been broken into and my rucksack was taken. And on both occasions, unfortunately, I didn't get my things back. So it was because it was the 3rd time. And it was a case of me feeling like totally fed up of kind of being a victim of thefts.
And had you gone about the situation prior the way you kind of should have, i.e. calling the police and taking all the precautions that, everyone knows to take?
Yeah, unfortunately, it wouldn't have worked out that way, and I would have lost another bag and some more belongings. So I probably, would have reacted in the same way. I wish ideally, obviously, that potentially I was maybe a little bit forceful in kind of stopping the guy. So at least everyone could win, and the police could also catch the criminal. Yeah. But unfortunately, that didn't happen.
And all these sort of experiences that you've had, obviously around theft and being robbed and all of this sort of stuff, and the repeat that offense, how does it make you feel towards the police and towards the justice system? I guess it's an interesting perspective because you're a man as well. And when I think about, I mean, I've had things stolen from me and I just don't think I would have the confidence to take it into my own hands. I just feel as though maybe that's a different perspective coming from a guy as well. So how do you feel about the police and the justice system, given the fact that you've experienced this not once, not twice, but 3 times?
Yeah, look, I have to take my emotion out of it. And if I think about it sensibly and logically, it's a difficult position for them as well. I wish, look, in all, I wish that they reacted faster to things.
Yeah.
However, like, their hands are tied. Now, for example, the only way for them to have caught that guy would be if they physically saw him, or if I gave them CCTV footage and then they saw him on another occasion, or they spotted him on their surveillance patrols or whatnot. So unfortunately nowadays, the reason why criminals and people and thieves get away with so much is because unless they're caught in the act, it's so difficult for them to be caught after. So I don't really hold much of a grudge against the police in that respect. I do feel like that if there was definitely more police presence in general in London and everywhere else, there'd be less crime as a whole, especially on the street crime.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing your story. I know that you mentioned that you hadn't shared that story with lots of people, so we're really, really thankful that you did with us.
No, I do, and I hope anyone who listens, and I hope anyone who listens and has had similar experiences, or hopefully doesn't, but if anyone comes to an experience like this in the future and they've heard mine, potentially that will help them in ways to react and take the emotion out of the situation immediately and try to think logically.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I feel like that call was so interesting. I feel as though it's an interesting perspective coming from a man and talking about like something like theft that is so common, and yet you don't hear that many stories of people actually going to the place where the thief is, uncovering the goods, and like, you know, taking the law into his own hands in a sense, although he did call the police. What if that happened to you? What do you think? How do you think you would respond?
I don't know. I guess he has the perspective that the same situation has happened to him twice. Well, actually, it happened to him 3 times, but twice prior to him taking the kind of course of action in his own way. But I guess if you've experienced something twice and you went about it in the way that you were supposed to go about it, and then it still hasn't come to fruition the way you want it to, then obviously it makes sense the way that he went about it. I feel like I guess being a woman is different because, like he said, you know, as soon as he saw the guy in the shop, he realized that he wasn't a threat to him, and then he could go ahead and chase after him or whatever that is. I feel like being a woman, you naturally already have the disposition that you will probably be the weakest link. So you don't have that thought. And yeah, I guess I definitely wouldn't go looking for someone that has robbed me. I feel like, you know, that's already scary grounds. And
it's interesting that the first 2 times he didn't do anything about it in terms of like taking the situation into his own hands.
I think that's because the police didn't do anything about it. So you had to.
Sure. He like got to a stage where he felt as though
like impossible.
It was his last kind of like way of getting justice, which is what he was saying, that he felt as though he was doing it to get justice. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's interesting from the perspective that it was only when he saw the guy that then he felt as though he wasn't a threat. Obviously, you sort of think in your mind that people who commit crime are these big, scary, frightening people that jump out of bushes, and actually, more often than not, they're your typical guy you'd see on the street, and you wouldn't think anything about it, really. So it's interesting as though we have a perception of criminals, and then the reality is something different. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. If you or anyone you know has experienced something similar to what our caller has described today, then we would love to hear your story. We'd love to hear different type of perspectives from all different types of people. That's why we're doing what we're doing, and look out for next week's episode.